Egil Skallagrimsson här. EGIL'S SAGA. Chapter 50 of Æthelstan, King of the English. Alfred the Great ruled England, being of his family the first supreme king over all of England. That was in the days of Harald Fairhair, King of Norway. After Alfred, Edward his son was King of England. He was father of Æthelstan the Victorious, who was foster father of Hakon the Good. It was at this time of our story that Æthelstan took the kingdom after his father. There were several brothers, sons of Edward. But when Æthelstan had taken the kingdom, then those chieftains who had before lost their power to his forefathers rose up in rebellion against him. Now they thought was the easiest time to claim back their own, when a young king ruled the realm. These were Britons, Scots, and Irish. King Æthelstan therefore gathered him an army, and gave pay to all such as wished to enrich themselves, both foreigners and natives. The brothers Thorolf and Egil were standing southwards along Saxony and Flanders, when they heard that the King of England wanted men, and that theirs was in his service hope of much gain. So they decided to go to England, and they went on that autumn till they came to King Æthelstan. He received them well. He saw plainly that such followers would be of great help. Soon did the English king decide to ask them to join him, to take pay there and become defenders of his island. They so agreed between them that they became King Æthelstan's men. England was thoroughly Christian in faith, and had long been so, when these things happened. King Æthelstan was a good Christian. He was called Æthelstan the Faithful. The king asked Thorolf and his brother to consent to take the first signing with the cross, for this was then a common custom both with merchants and those who took soldiers' pay in Christian armies, since those who were prime signed could hold all intercourse with Christians and heathens alike. Thorolf and Egil did this at the king's request, and both let themselves be prime signed. They had 300 men with them who took the king's pay. Chapter 51 of Olaf, King of Scots. Olaf the Red was the name of the king in Scotland. He was Scotch on his father's side, but Danish on his mother's side, and came of the family of Ragnar Haribreeks. He was a powerful prince. Scotland, as compared with England, was reckoned a third of the realm. Northumberland was reckoned a fifth part of England. It was the northernmost county, marching with Scotland on the eastern side of the island. Formerly the Danish kings had held it. Its chief town is York. It was in Æthelstan's dominions. He had set over it 2 earls, one named Alfgeir, the other Gudric. They were set there as defenders of the land against the inroads of Scots, Danes, and Norsemen, who harried the land much, and though they had a strong claim on the land there, because in Northumberland nearly all the inhabitants were Danish by the father's or mother's side, and many on both sides. Bretland was governed by 2 brothers, Ring and Adels. They were tributaries under King Æthelstan, and withal had this right, that when they were in the king in the field, they and their force should be in the van of battle before the royal standard. These brothers were right good warriors, but not young men. Alfred the Great had deprived all tributary kings of name and power. They were now called earls, who had before been kings or princes. This was maintained throughout his lifetime and his son's Edward's. But Æthelstan came young to the kingdom, and of him they stood less in awe. wherefore many now were disloyal who had been before faithful subjects. Chapter 52 of the Gathering of the Host. Olaf, King of Scots, drew together a mighty host and marched upon England. When he came to Northumberland, he advanced with shield of war. On learning this, the earls who ruled there mustered their forces and went against the king. And when they met, there was a great battle, whereof the issue was that King Olaf won the victory, but Earl Gudric fell, and Alfgeir fled away, as did the greater part of the force that had followed them and escaped from the field. And now King Olaf found no further resistance, but subdued all of Northumberland. Alfgeir went to King Æthelstan and told him of his defeat. But as soon as King Æthelstan heard that so mighty a host was come into his land, he dispatched men and summoned forces, sending word to his earls and other nobles. And with such force as he had, he once turned him and marched against the Scots. But when it was bruited about that Olaf, King of Scots, had won a victory and subdued under him a large part of England, he soon had a much larger army than Æthelstan, for many, many nobles joined him. On learning this, Ring and Adils, who had gathered much people, turned to swell King Olaf's army. Those their numbers became exceedingly great. All this when Æthelstan learned, he summoned to conference his captains and his counsellors. He inquired of them what best he should do. He told the whole council point by point what he had ascertained about the doings of the Scots king and all his many numbers of men. All present were agreed on this, that Alfgeir was most to blame, and thought it were but his due to lose his earldom. But the plan resolved on was this, that King Æthelstan should go back to south to England, and then for himself hold a levy of troops coming northward through the whole land. For they saw that the only way for the needed numbers to be levied in time was for the king himself to gather the forces. As for the army already assembled, the king set over it as commanders Thorolf and Egil. They were also to lead the force with the freebooters that brought with the king, but Alfgeir still held command over his own troops. Further, the king appointed such captains of company as he thought fit. When Egil returned from the council to his fellows, they asked him what the tidings he could tell of the Scots king, and Egil sang a song. Olaf, one earl, be furious, onslaught in flight hath driven, the other slain, a sovereign, stubborn in fight is he, upon the field fared Gudric, false path to his undoing, he holds this foe of England, Northumbria's humbled soil. After this they sent messengers to King Olaf, giving out this as their errand, that King Æthelstan would fain enhazel him a field, and offer battle on Vinheath by Vinwood. Meanwhile he would have them forbear to harry his land, but of the twain he should rule England who should conquer in the battle. He appointed a week hence for the conflict, and whichever first came on the ground should wait a week for the other. Now this was then the custom, that so soon as a king had enhazeled a field, it was a shameful act to harry before the battle was ended. Accordingly, King Olaf halted and harried not, but waited till the appointed day, when he moved his army to Van Heath. North of the heath stood a town. There in the town King Olaf quartered him, and there he had the greatest part of his force, because there was a wide district around which seemed to him convenient for the bringing in of such provisions as the army needed. But he sent men of his own up the heath where the battlefield was appointed. These were to take camping ground and make all ready before the army came. But when the men came to the place where the field was enhazeled, there were all the hazel poles set up to mark the ground where the battle should be. The place ought to be chosen level, and whereon a large host might be set in array, and such was this, for in the place where the battle was to be heath, with a river flowing on one side, on the other was a large wood. But where the distance between the wood and the river was least, the King Æthelstan men had pitched, and their tents quite filled the space between wood and river. They had so pitched that in every third tent there were no men at all, and in one of every 3 but a few. Yet when King Olaf's men came to them, they had their numbers swarming before all the tents, and the others could not get to go inside. Æthelstan's men said that their tents were all full, so full that the people had not enough room to go about. But the front line of tents stood so high that it could not be seen over them whether there stood many or no men at all. Olaf's men imagined a vast host must be there. King Olaf's men pitched north of the hazel poles, toward which the side of the ground sloped a tiny bit. From day to day Æthelstan's men said that the king would come, or was come, to the town that lay south of the heath. Meanwhile forces flocked to them both day and night. But when the appointed time had expired, then Æthelstan's men sent envoys to King Olaf with these words: King Æthelstan is ready for battle, and had a mighty host, but he sends to King Olaf these words, that he would fain that they should not cause so much bloodshed as now looks likely. He begs Olaf rather to go home to Scotland, and Æthelstan will give him a friendly gift, 1 shilling of silver from every plough through all his realm, and he wishes that they should become friends. When the messengers came to Olaf, he was just beginning to make ready his army and his attack. But on the messengers declaring the errand, he forbore to advance for that day. Then he and his captains sat at council, whereupon opinions were much divided. Some strongly desired that these terms should be taken. They said that this journey had already won them great honor, if they should go home after receiving so much money from Æthelstan. But some were against it, saying that Æthelstan would offer much more the second time, where he refused. And this latter counsel prevailed. Then the messengers begged King Olaf to give them time to go back to King Æthelstan, and try if he would pay yet more money to ensure the peace. They asked a truce of 1 day for their journey home, another for deliberation, and a third to return to Olaf. The king granted them this. The messengers went home, and came back on the 3rd day according to promise. They now said to King Olaf that Æthelstan would give them all that he offered before, and over and above, for distribution among King Olaf's soldiers, 1 shilling to every freeborn man, a silver mark to every officer of a company of 12 men or more, a gold mark to every captain of the king's guard, and 5 gold marks to every earl. Then the king laid this offer before his forces. It was again as before. Some opposed this, some desired it. In the end the king gave a decision. He said he would accept these terms, if this too were added, that the King Æthelstan himself let him have all Northumberland with the tributes and dues thereto belonging. Again the messengers asked armistice of 3 days, with this further, that King Olaf should send his men to hear Æthelstan's answer, whether he would take these terms or no. They said that to their thinking Æthelstan will hardly refuse anything to ensure peace. King Olaf agreed to this and sent his men to King Æthelstan. Then the messengers ride all together and find King Æthelstan in the town that was close to the heath on the south. King Olaf's messengers declared before Æthelstan their errand and the proposals for peace. King Æthelstan's men told also with that what offers they had gotten to King Olaf with, adding that this had been the counsel of wise men, thus to delay the battle so long as the king had not come. But King Æthelstan made a quick decision on this matter, and thus bespake the messengers, Bear ye these my words to King Olaf, that I will give him leave for this to go home to Scotland with his forces. Only let him restore all the property that he has wrongly taken here in the land. Then make we peace between our lands, neither harrying the other. Further be it provided that King Olaf shall become my vassal, and hold Scotland for me, and be my under-king. Go now back, said he, and tell him this. At once that same evening the messengers turned back on their way, and came to King Olaf about midnight. They then waked up the king, and told him straightway the words of King Æthelstan. The king instantly summoned his earls and other captains. He then caused the messengers to come and declare the issue of their errand and the words of Æthelstan. But when this was made known before the soldiers, all with one mouth said they that this was now before them, to prepare for battle. The messengers said this too, that Æthelstan had a numerous force, but he had come into the town on that same day when the messengers came there. Then spoke Earl Adils, Now methinks that this has come to pass, O king, which I said, that you found tricksters in the English. We have sat here a long time and waited while they have gathered to them all their forces, whereas their king can now be nowhere near when we came here. They will have been assembling a multitude while we were sitting still. Now this is my counsel, king, that we two brothers ride at once forward this very night with our troop. It may be they will have no fear for themselves now that they think their king is near with a large army. So we shall make a dash upon them. But if they turn and fly, they will lose some of the men, and be less bold afterward for conflict with us. The king thought this good counsel. We will here make ready our army, he said, as soon as it is light, and move to support you. This plan they fixed upon, and so they ended the council. Chapter 53 of the Fight. Earl Ring and Adils, his brother, made ready their army, and at once in the night moved southwards for the heath. But when day dawned, Thorolf's sentries saw the army approaching. Then was a war blast blown on the horns, and men donned their arms, select spirits, and they began to draw upon the force, and they had 2 divisions. Earl Alfgeir commanded one division, and the standard was borne before him. In that division were his own followers, and also what force had been gathered from the countryside. It was a larger force than with which Thorolf and Egil followed. Thorolf was thus armed. He had a shield ample and stout, a right strong helmet on his head. He was girded with the sword that he called Long, a weapon large and good. In his hand he had a halberd, wherefore the feather-formed blade was 2 ells long, ending in a 4-edged spike. The blade was broad above, the socket both long and thick. The shaft stood just high enough for the hand to grasp the socket, and was remarkably thick. The socket fitted with iron prong on the shaft, which was also wound round with iron. Such weapons were called mail piercers. Egil was armed in the same way as Thorolf. He was girded with the sword that he called Adder. This he had gotten in Courland. It was a right good weapon. Neither of the 2 had a shirt of mail. They set up the standard, which was borne by Thorfid the Strong. All their men had Norwegian shields and Norwegian armor in every point, and in their division were all the Norsemen who were present. Thorolf's force was drawn up near the wood. Alfgeir's moved along the river. Earl Adils and his brother saw that they would not come upon Thorolf unaware, so they began to draw up their force. They also made 2 divisions and had 2 standards. Adils was opposed to Earl Alfgeir, ring to the freebooters. The battle now began, both charged with spirit. Earl Adels pressed on hard and fast till Alfgeir gave ground. Then Adel's men pressed on twice as boldly, nor was it long before Alfgeir fled, and this is to be told of him, that he rode away south over the heath, and a company of men rode with him. He rode till he came near the town, where sat the king. Then spake the earl, I deem it not safe for us to enter the town. We got sharp words of late when we came to the king after defeat by King Olaf, and he will not think our case bettered by this coming. No need to expect honor where he is. Then he rode to the south country, and of his travels 'tis this to be told, that he rode night and day till he and his came westwards to Earl's Ness. Then the earl got a ship to take him southwards over the sea, and he came to France, where half of his kin were. He never again returned to England. Adels at first pursued the flying foe, but not far. Then he turned back to where the battle was, and made an onset there. This when Thorolf saw, he said that Egil should turn and encounter him, and bade that the standard be borne that way. His men he bade hold well together, and stand close. Move we to the wood, said he, and let it cover our back, so that they may not come at us from all sides. They did so, and followed along the wood. Fierce was the battle there. Egil charged against Adels, and they had a hard fight. The odds of numbers were great, yet more of Adel's men fell than of Egil's. Then Thorolf became so furious that he cast his shield on his back, and grasping his halberd with both hands, bounded forward, dealing cut and thrust on either side. Men sprang away from him both ways, but he slew many. Thus he cleared the way forward to Ring's standard, and then nothing could stop him. He killed the man who bore the earl's standard, and cut down the standard pole. After that he lunged with his halberd at the earl's breast, driving it right through mail coat and body, so that it came out at the shoulders, and he lifted him up on the halberd over his head, and planted the butt end in the ground. There on the weapon the earl breathed out his last life in sight of all, both friends and foes. Then Thorolf drew his sword and dealt blows on either side, his men also charging. Many Britons and Scots fell, but some turned and fled. But Earl Adel, seeing his brothers fall, and the slaughter of many of his force, and the flight of some, while himself was in hard stress, turned to fly, and ran to the wood. Into the wood he fled, he and his company, and then all the force that had followed the earl took to flight. Thorolf and Egil pursued the flying foe. Great was then the slaughter. The fugitives were scattered far and wide over the heath. Earl Adels had lowered his standard, so none could know his company from others. And soon the darkness of night began to close in. Thorolf and Egil returned to their camp, and just then King Æthelstan came up with the main army, and they pitched their tents and made their arrangements. A little after came King Olaf with his army. They too encamped and made their arrangements, where their men had before placed their tents. Then it was time told King Olaf that both his earls Ring and Adels were fallen, and a multitude of his men likewise killed in battle. Chapter 54. The Fall of Thorolf. King Æthelstan had passed the night before in the town whereof mention was made, and there he heard rumour that there had been fighting on the heath. At once he and all the host made ready and marched northwards to the heath. There they learnt all the tidings clearly, how the battle had gone. Then the brothers Thorolf and Egil came to meet the king. He thanked them much for the brave advance and the victory they had won. He promised them his hearty friendship, and they all remained together for the night. No sooner did day dawn than Æthelstan waked up his army. He held conference with his captains and told them how his forces should be arranged. His own division he first arranged, and in the van thereof he set those companies that were the smartest. Then he said that Egil should command these, but Thorolf said he shall be with his own men, and such others as I add to. This force shall be opposed to the part of the enemy which is loose and not in set array, for the Scots are very loose. They run to and fro and dash forward here and there. Often they prove dangerous if men be not wary, but they are unsteady in the field if boldly faced. Egil answered the king, I will not that I and Thorolf be parted in battle. Rather to me it seems well that we two be placed there where is like most to be needed in hardest fighting. Thorolf said, Leave we the king to rule where he place us. Serve we as him he likes best. I will, if you wish it, change places with you. Egil said, Brother, you will have your way, but this separation I shall often rue. After this they formed in the divisions as the king had arranged, and the standards were raised. The king's division stood on the plain toward the river. Thorolf's division moved on the higher ground beside the wood. King Olaf drew up his forces when he saw King Æthelstan had done so. He also made 2 divisions, and his own standard and the division that he himself commanded he opposed to King Æthelstan. Either had a large army, there was no difference on the score of numbers, but King Olaf's 2nd division moved near the wood against the force under Thorolf. The commanders were Scotch earls, the men mostly Scots, and it was a great multitude of men. And now the armies closed, and soon the battle waxed fierce. Thorolf pressed eagerly forward, causing his standard to be borne onwards along the woodside. He thought to go so far forward as to turn upon the Scottish king, divisions behind their shields. His own men held their shields before them. They trusted to the wood which was on their right to cover that side. So far in advance went Thorolf that few of his men went before him. But just when he was least on his guard, out leapt from the wood Earl Adils and his followers. They thrust at Thorolf at once with many halberds, and there by the wood he fell. But Thorfid, who bore the standard, drew back to where the men stood thicker. Adils now attacked them, and a fierce contest was there. The Scots shouted a shout of victory, as having slain the enemy's chieftain. This shout, when Egil heard, and saw Thorolf's standard going down, he felt sure that Thorolf himself would not be with it, so he bounded over the space between the 2 divisions. Full soon learnt he the tidings of what was done, when he came to his men. Then did he keenly spur them on to charge, himself foremost in the vanguard. He had in his hand his sword adder. Forward Egil pressed, and hewed on either hand of him, felling many men. Thorfid bore the standard close after him. Behind the standard followed the rest. Right sharp was the conflict there. Egil went forward till he met Earl Adils. Few blows did they exchange, after Adils fell, and many men around him. But after the Earl's death his followers fled. Egil and his force pursued, and killed all whom they overtook. No need there to beg quarter. Nor stood those Scotch earls long when they saw the others their fellows fly by, but at once they took to their heels. Whereupon Egil and his men made for where King Olaf's division was, and coming up upon them, their shields were soon wrought great havoc. The division wavered and broke up. Many of King Olaf's men then fled, and the Norsemen shouted a shout of victory. But when King Æthelstan perceived King Olaf's division beginning to break, he then spurred on his force, and bade his standard advance. a fierce onset was made, so that King Olaf's force recoiled, and there was a great slaughter. King Olaf fell there, and the greater part of the force which he had, for those who turned to fly all were overtaken and slain. Thus King Æthelstan gained a signal victory. Chapter 55. Egil buries Thorolf. While his men still pursued the fugitives, King Æthelstan left the battlefield and rode back to the town. Nor stayed he for the night before he came. But Egil pursued the flying foe and followed them far, slaying every man whom he overtook. At length, sated with pursuit, he with his followers turned back and came back where the battle had been, and found there the dead body of his brother Thorolf. He took it up, washed it, and performed such other offices as were the wont of the time. They dug a grave there, and laid Thorolf therein with all his weapons and raiment. Then Egil clasped a gold bracelet on either wrist before he parted from him. This done, they heaped on stones and cast in mould. Then Egil sang a stave. Dauntless, the great champion, dashed on the earl's bold slayer. In stormy stress of battle, stout-hearted Thorolf fell. Green grows on soil Vinheath, grass o'er my noble brother. But we our woe a sorrow, worse than death pang must bear. With warriors slain round standard, the western field I burdened. Adels with my blue adder, assailed mid snow of war. Olaf young prince encountered, England in battle thunder. Ring stood not stour of weapons, starved not the raven's maw. Then went Egil and those about him to seek King Æthelstan, and at once went before the king, where he sat at drinking. There was much noise of merriment, and when the king saw that Egil was come in, he bade the lower bench be cleared for them, and that Egil should sit in the high seat facing the king. Egil sat down there and cast his shield before his feet. He had his helm on his head and laid his sword across his knees, and now again he half drew it, then clashed it back into the sheath. He sat upright, but with head bent forward. Egil was large-featured, broad of forehead with large eyebrows, a nose not long but very thick, lips wide and long, chin exceedingly broad, as well as all about the jaws. Thick-necked was he and big-shouldered beyond other men, hard features and grim when angry. He was well made, more than commonly tall, had hair wolf-grey and thick, but became early bald. He was black-eyed and brown-skinned. But as he sat, he drew one eyebrow down towards the cheek, the other up to the roots of his hair. He would not drink now, though the horn was borne to him, but alternately twitched his brows up and down. King Æthelstan sat in the upper high seat. He too laid his sword across his knees. When they had sat there for a time, then the king drew his sword from the sheath, and took from his arm a gold ring large and good. Placing it upon the sword point, he stood up, and went across the floor and reached it over the fire to Egil. Egil stood up and drew his sword and went across the floor. He stuck the sword point within the round of the ring and drew it to him. Then he went back to his place. The king sate him again in his high seat. But when Egil was set down, he drew the ring on his arm, and then his brows went back to their place. He now laid down sword and helm, took the horn that they bare to him, and drank it off. Then sang he, Mailed monarch, god of battle, maketh the tinkling circlet, hang his own arm forsaking, on hawk-trod wrist of mine. I bear on arm brand wielding, bracelet of red gold gladly, war falcon's feeder meetly, findeth such meed of praise. Thereafter Egil drank his share and talked with others. Presently the king caused to be borne in 2 chests. 2 men bare each, both were full of silver. The king said, These chests, Egil, they shalt have, and if thou come to Iceland, shalt carry this money to thy father, as payment for a son I send it to him. But some of the money thou shalt divide among such kinsmen of thyself and Thorolf, as you think must honourable. But thou shalt take here payment for a brother with me, land or chattels which you will. And if you will abide with me long, then I will give you honour and dignity such as myself may name. Egil took the money and thanked the king for his gifts and friendly words. Thenceforward Egil began to be cheerful, and then he sang, In sorrow sadly drooping, sunk my brows close knitted. Then found I one who furrows a forehead could smooth. Fierce frowning cliffs that shaded my face a king hath lifted. With gleam of golden armlet, gloom leaveth my eyes. Then those men were healed whose wounds left hope of life. Egil abode with King Æthelstan for the next winter after Thorolf's death, and had very great honour from the king. With Egil was then all the force which had followed the 2 brothers, and come alive out of the battle. Egil now made a poem about King Æthelstan, and in it this stave. Land shielder, battle quickener, lo now this scion royal, earls 3 hath laid to Ella, earth must obedient bow, lavish of gold, kin glorious, great Æthelstan victorious. Surely I swear all humbled to such high monarch yields, but this is the burden in the poem. Reindeer trod hills obey, bold Æthelstan's high sway. Then gave Æthelstan further to Egil as poet's meed 2 gold rings, each weighing a mark, and therewith a costly cloak that the king himself had formerly worn. But when spring came, Egil signified to the king this, that he purposed to go away in the summer to Norway, and to learn how matters stand with Asgerd, my late brother Thorolf's wife. A large property is there in all, but I know not whether there be children of theirs living. I am bound to look after them, if they live, but I am heir to all, if Thorolf died childless. The king answered, This will be, Egil, for you to arrange to go away hence if you think you have an errand of duty. But I think thereto the best that you should settle down here with me on such terms as you like to ask. Egil thanked the king for his words. I will, he said, now first go, as I am in duty bound to do, but it is likely that I shall return hither to see after this promise as soon as I can. The king bade him to do so, whereupon Egil made him ready to depart with his men, but of these many remained behind with the king. Egil had one large warship, and on board thereof 100 men or thereabouts, and when he was ready for his voyage, and the fair wind blew, he put out to sea. He and King Æthelstan parted with great friendship. The king begged Egil to return as soon as possible. This Egil promised to do. Then Egil stood for Norway, and when he came to land sailed with all speed into the firths. He heard these tidings, that Lord Thorir was dead, and Arenbjorn had taken inheritance after him, and was made a baron. Egil went to Arenbjorn, and there got a good welcome. Arenbjorn asked him to stay there. Egil accepted this, had his ship set up, and his crew lodged. But Arenbjorn received Egil and 12 men. They stayed with him through the winter. Chapter 56. Marriage of Egil. Bergenund, son of Thorgeir Thornfoot, had then married Gunhilda, daughter of Bjorn Yeoman. She had come to keep house with him at Asker, but Asgerda, whom Thorolf Skallagrimsson had had to wife, was then with Arinbjorn, her kinsman. Thorolf and she had a daughter named Thordis, and the girl was there with her mother. Egil told Asgerda of Thorolf's death and offered her his guardianship. Asgerda was much grieved at the tidings. She answered Egil's words well, saying however but little one way or the other. But as autumn wore on, Egil began to be very gloomy and drank little, and often sat with his head drooping on his cloak. One time Arinbjorn went to him and asked what meant his gloom. Though now you have had a great loss in your brother, yet 'tis manly to bear up well. Many must overlive man. Come, what verse are you now repeating? Let me hear it. Egil said he had just made this verse. Unfriendly who was friend, fair goddess seems of old. Bold with uplifted brow, beheld I a woman's face. Now one whose name I veil, no sooner to the scald occurs than shyly sinks, screened in his cloak, his head. Arinbjorn asked who was the woman about whom he composed such love song. Have you hidden her name in the stave? Then Egil recited, Sorrow shows naught but hides the saddening thought within. Names in my poesy not oft I used to veil, for Odin's warriors' wights will surely searching find in war god's wine of song what poet deep hath plunged. Here, said Egil, will the old saw be found true. All should be told to a friend. I will tell you that which you ask, about what woman I composed the verse. 'Tis Asgerda, your kinswoman, and I would fain have you furtherance to secure this match. Arinbjorn said that he deemed it well thought of. I will, said he, surely give my good word that this match may be made. Then Egil laid this matter before Asgerda, but she referred it to the decision of her father and her kinsman Arinbjorn. Arinbjorn talked with Asgerda, and she made the same answer. Arinbjorn was desirous of this match. After this, Arinbjorn and Egil went together to Bjorn, and then Egil made his suit and asked to wife Asgerda, Bjorn's daughter. Bjorn took this matter well, and said that Arinbjorn should chiefly decide this. Arinbjorn desired it, and the end of the matter was that Egil and Asgerda were betrothed, and the wedding was to be at Arinbjorn's. And when the appointed time came, there was a very grand feast at Egil's marriage. He was then very cheerful for the remaining part of the winter. In the spring he made ready a merchant ship for a voyage to Iceland. Arinbjorn advised him not to settle in Norway while Gunhilda's power was so great, for she is very wroth with you, said Arinbjorn, and this is made much worse by your encounter with Eyvind near Jutland. But when Egil was ready and a fair wind blew, he sailed out to sea, and his voyage sped well. He came in the autumn to Iceland and stood in Borgarfirth. He had now been out 12 winters. Skallagrim was an old man by this time. Full glad was he when Egil came home. Egil went to lodge at Borg, and with him Thorfinn Strong and many of their company, and they were there with Skallagrim for the winter. Egil had immense store of wealth, but it is not told that Egil shared the silver which King Æthelstan had given him, either with Skallagrim or others. That winter Thorfinn married Saun, Skallagrim's daughter, and in the following spring Skallagrim gave them a homestead at Long River Foss, and the land inwards from Leiru Brook between Long River and Swan River, even up to the fell. Daughter of Thorfinn and Saun was Thorfinn's wife to Ange and Holm, the son of Bersi Godless. Their son was Bjorn, Hittedale's champion. Egil abode there with Skallagrim several winters. He took upon him the management of the property and farm no less than Skallagrim. Egil became more and more bold. The countryside began now to be settled far and wide. Romund, brother of Grim the Hallowglander, settled at this time in the Cross River Lythe with his shipmates. Romund was father of Gunnlaug, the father of Thuridir Daila, mother of Illugi the Swarthy. Egil had now been several winters at Borg with his father, when one summer a ship from Norway to Iceland with these tidings from the east, that Bjorn yeoman was dead. Further, it was told that all the property owned by Bjorn had been taken up by Bergenund, his son-in-law, who had moved to his own home, all the loose chattels, letting out the lands and securing to himself all the rents. He had also got possession of all the farms occupied of late by Bjorn. This, when Egil heard, he inquired carefully whether Bjorn had acted on his own counsel in this matter, or had the support of others more powerful. It was told him that Onund was become a close friend of King Eric, but was on even more intimate terms with Gunhilda. Egil let the matter rest for this autumn, but when winter was past and spring came, then Egil bade them draw out his ship, which had stood in its shed along Long River Foss. This ship he made ready for sea, and got a crew thereto. Asgerda his wife was to go with him, but Thordis, Thorolf's daughter, remained behind. Egil sailed out to sea when he was ready, and of his voyage there is nothing to tell before he came to Norway. He at once, as soon as he could, went to seek Arenbjorn. Arenbjorn received him well, and asked Egil to stay with him. This offer he took. So both he and Asgerda went thither, and several men with them. Egil very soon spoke with Arenbjorn about these claims on money that he thought he had there in the land. Arenbjorn said, "That matter seems to me unpromising. Bergenund is hard, ill to deal with, unjust, covetous, and he has now much support from the king and the queen. Gunhilda is your bitter enemy, and you know already she will not desire Onund to put the case right." Egil said, "The king will let us get law and justice in this matter, and with your help it seems no great thing in my eyes to take the law of Bergenund." They resolved on this, that Egil should equip a swift cutter, whereupon they embarked some 20 men, and went south to Hordaland, and on to Asker. There they go to the house and find Onund. Egil declares his business, and demands of Onund's sharing of the heritage of Bjorn. He says that Bjorn's daughters were by law both alike his heirs, though methinks, says Egil, Asgerda will be deemed more nobly born than your wife Gunhilda. Then says Onund in high-pitched voice, "A wondrous bold man are you, Egil, the outlaw of King Eric, who come hither to this land and think here to attack his men and friends. You ought to know, Egil, that I have overthrown men as good as you for less cause than methinks this is, when you claim heritage and right of your wife, for this is well known to all that she is born of a bondwoman." Onund was furious in language for a time, but when Egil saw that Onund would do no right in this matter, then he summoned him to court, and referred the matter to the law of the Gula Thing. Onund said to the Gula Thing, "I will come, and my will is that you should not come away thence with a whole skin." Egil said he would risk coming to the Thing all the same. There let come what come may to end our matter. Egil then went away with his company, and when he came home told Arenbjorn of his journey and of Onund's answer. Arenbjorn was very angry that Thora, his father's sister, had been called a bondwoman. Arenbjorn went to King Eric and declared this matter before him. The king took his words rather sullenly, and said that Arenbjorn had long advocated Egil's cause. "He has had this grace through thee, that I have let him be here in this land, but now shall I think it too much to bear if thou back him in his assaults on my friends." Arenbjorn said, "Thou wilt let us get law in this case." The king was rather peevish in this talk, but Arenbjorn could see that the queen was much worse-willed. Arenbjorn went back and said that things looked rather unpromising. Then winter wore away, and the time came when men should go to the Gula Thing. Arenbjorn took to the thing a numerous company. Among them went Egil. Chapter 57. Suit between Egil and Onund. King Eric was there numerously attended. Bergenland was among his train, as were his brothers. There was a large following. But when the meeting was to be held about men's lawsuits, both the parties went where the court was, to plead their proofs. Then was Onund full of big words. Now where the court sate was a level plot, with hazel poles planted in a ring, and outside were twisted ropes all around. This was called the precincts. Within the ring sat 12 judges of the Firth folk, 12 of the Sown folk, 12 of the Horder folk. These 3 12s were to judge all the suits. Arenbjorn ruled who should be judges from the Firth folk, third of all, and who should be so from the Sown folk. All these were of one party. Arenbjorn had brought thither a long ship full equipped, also many small craft and store ships. King Eric had 6 or 7 long ships, all well equipped. A great number of landowners were also there. Egil began his cause thus. He craved the judges to give him lawful judgment in the suit between him and Onund. He then set forth what proofs he held of his claim on the property that had belonged to Bjorn Brynjolf's son. He said that Asgerd, a daughter of Bjorn, own wife of him Egil, was rightful heiress, born noble, of landed gentry, even of titled family further back. And he craved of the judges this, to adjudge to Asgerd a half of Bjorn's inheritance, whether land or chattels. And when he ceased speaking, then Borgenen took the word and spoke thus: Gunhilda, my wife, is the daughter of Bjorn and Olaf, the wife whom Bjorn lawfully married. Gunhilda is rightful heiress of Bjorn. I, for this reason, took possession of all the property left by Bjorn, because I knew that the other daughter of Bjorn had no right to inherit. Her mother was a captive of war, afterwards taken as a concubine, without her kinsman's consent, and carried from land to land. But thou, Egil, thinkest to go on here, as everywhere else. Why thy fierceness and wrongful dealing? This will not avail thee now, for King Eric and Queen Gunhilda have promised me that I shall have right in every cause within the bounds of their dominion. I will produce true evidence before the king and the judges that Thora Lacehand, Asgerd's mother, was taken captive from the house of Thora her brother, and a second time from Brynjolf's house at Arland. Then she went away out of the land with freebooters, and was outlawed from Norway, and in this outlawry Bjorn and she had borne to them this girl Asgerda. A great wonder now is this in Egil, that he thinks to make void all the words of King Eric. First, Egil, thou art here in the land after Eric made thee an outlaw. Secondly, which is worse, thou hast a bondwoman to thy wife, thou claimest for her right of heritage. I demand this of the judges, that they adjudge the inheritance to Gunhilda, but adjudge Asgerda to be the bondwoman of the king, because she was begotten when her father and mother were outlawed by the king. Right wroth was Arenbjorn when he heard Thora Lacehand called a bondwoman, and he stood up and would no longer hold his peace, but looked around on either side and took the word. Evidence we will bring, Sir King, in this matter, and oaths we will add, that this was in the reconciliation of my father and Bjorn yeoman expressly provided, that Asgerd, a daughter of Bjorn and Thora, was to have right in inheriting after Bjorn her father, as also this which thyself, O king, dost know, that thou restored Bjorn to his rights in Norway, and so everything was settled which had before stood in the way of their reconciliation. To these words the king found no ready answer. Then sang Egil a stave. Bondwoman born this knave, my brooch-decked lady calls, shameless in selfish greed, such dealings Onund loves. Braggart, my bride is one, born heiress, jewelled dame. Our oaths, great king, accept, oaths that are true, meet and true. Then Arenbjorn produced witnesses, 12 men, all well chosen. These all had heard, being present, the reconciliation of Thorir and Bjorn, and they offered to the king and judges to swear it. The judges were willing to accept the oath if the king forbade it not. Then did Gunhilda, the queen, take the word. Great wonder is this, Sir King, that thou lettest the big Egil make such a coil of the whole cause before thee. Wouldst thou find naught to say against him, though he should claim at thy hand the very kingdom? Now though thou wilt give no decision that may help Onund, yet will not I brook this, that Egil tread under foot our friends, and wrongfully take the property from Onund. Where is Alf my brother? Go thou, Alf, with thy willing, where the judges are, and let them not give this wrong judgment. Then he and his men went thither, and cut in sunder the precinct ropes, and tore down the poles, and scattered the judges. Great uproar was there in the thing, but men there were all weaponless. Then spake Egil, Can Bergenund hear my words? I hear, said Onund. Then do I challenge thee to combat, and be our fight here at the thing. Let him of us twain have this property, both lands and chattels, who wins the victory. But be thou every man's dastard if thou darest not. Whereupon King Eric made answer, If thou, Egil, art strongly set on fighting, then will we grant thee this forthwith. Egil replied, I will not fight with king's power and overwhelming force, but before equal numbers I will not flee, if this be given me, nor will I then make any distinction of persons titled or untitled. Then spake Arenbjorn, Go we away, Egil, we shall not here effect today anything that will be to our gain. And with this Arenbjorn and all his people turned to depart. But Egil turned him and cried aloud, This do I protest before thee, Arenbjorn, and before thee, Thord, and all the men now that can hear my word, barons and lawmen and all people, that I ban on all these lands that belong to Bjorn Bjornjolfsson, from building and tillage, and from all gain thereof to be gotten. I ban them to thee, Borgenund, and to all the others, natives and foreigners, high and low. And any one who shall foreign offend I denounce as a lawbreaker, a peacebreaker, and accursed. After which Egil went away with Arenbjorn. They then went to their ships, and there was a rise in the ground of some extent to pass over, so that the ships were not visible from the Thing field. Egil was very wroth, and when they came to the ships, Arenbjorn spoke before his people and said, All men know what has been the issue of the thing here, that we have not got law, but the king is much in wrath, so that I expect our men will get hard measure from him if he can bring it about. I will now that every man embark on his ship and go home, let none wait for other. Then Arenbjorn went on board his own ship, and to Egil he said, Now go you with your comrades and board the cutter that lies here outside the longship, and get you away at once. Travel by night so as you may, and not by day, and be on your guard, for the king will seek to meet you. Come and find me afterwards, when all this is ended, whatever may have chanced between you and the king. Egil did as Arenbjorn said. They went aboard the cutter, about 30 men, and rowed with them all their might. The vessel was remarkably fast. Then rowed out of haven many other ships of Arenbjorn's people, cutters and rowboats, but the long ship which Arenbjorn steered went fast, and Ford was the heaviest under oars. Egil's cutter which he steered soon outstripped the rest. Then Egil sang a stave. My heritage he steals, the money-grasping heir of Thornfoot, but his threats, though fierce, I boldly meet. For land we sought the law, land-grabbing loon is he, but robbery of my right, ere long he shall repay.